So one of the other things I like to do is I like to make sure that the axe head itself is going to be the outer limits of the actual handle. So that way the handle isn't actually sticking outside of the threshold of the axe head and doesn't get hung up on anything. So the way I like doing that is obviously I just like taking a measurement at its widest section and then applying that to the handle itself. And that's gonna kind of dictate the shape of the handle from that point on. Now, once you're that far back on the axe handle, nothing should be getting hung up anyway. And look, that's perfect. That everything is beyond the bounds of that point. So this isn't going to get hit or anything like that, which is great. That means that this is really close to finished, and we can just start shaping it. So let's start on this upper portion here. This is typically the upper shoulder and the lower knob are the two harder sections of the handle itself. The rest of this is just nothing. I mean, we're basically almost done with the rest of this handle at this point. But working on this segment here is pretty crucial to the look of the thing. So I like to kind of really be methodical and take my time. I know that it's flared from here to here, pretty much in a flat line here. We don't want that to wind up being a flat line. And on top of that, it's a little too chunky right here right now. So we're gonna shape this down. I might even shape that section down a little bit more, not too much more. I like keeping the mass up here to act as like a sink for all of the impact vibration. But let's shape this thing down a bit and get this closer to the final product right there. A lot of this is like instinctual at a certain point when it comes to shape, you know? You're not like going off the most rigid math in the world. You're just kind of like feeling it. Basically work it down and you're like, I like how that looks, and that's probably a point where you should stop. Got it changed in the grain direction there. Going from one layer to the next. You notice I kind of work with a lot of facets, right? So we have this facet, and this facet, all these different faces of wood that are actually flat. And I like doing that to get the general shape, and then I knock my edges down, whether that be with the Drawknife or with a sander. I think this is a low spot, so I gotta be careful right there. Notice I'm breaking through different layers of grain, so I'm kind of going really slow right there. Because if I were to pull too hard, I might wind up digging in too deep. Yeah, it's looking better. This spot's still a little too thick right here. Okay. Now while I have this general shape in my head, I'm going to flip it and work on the other side right now. Notice the trouble I'm having cutting through those different layers of grain. Just something you should pay attention to while you're working. Yeah, it's looking better. So, at this point, one of the things I like to do, check for symmetry with my eye, which I like it. That's actually looking way better. And then check for feel with my hands. And that is a huge thing with making an axe handle and with a lot of, woodworking that is more precise than not. Like if you feel high spots, they're high spots. If it feels wrong on your hand, that's probably a section that you should focus on. And so this feels pretty good. And always know, at this point it's rougher, right? So once we sand it down, it's going to be even smaller. So it might feel chunky, but that's probably something you're going to get rid of later on once you sand it. So you kind of have to take the mass that you're going to remove into consideration. And this is feeling really good. I notice right here, this spot is like a divot. And then on the opposite side, I've got actually a high spot right here. I can feel that just with my palm. So I'm gonna focus on this spot, knocking this spot down a little bit, but everything else feels pretty good. It might be a little boxy on the back end, but this turn is kind of a hard spot to work on with the bigger draw knife that I'm working with right now. I might use a smaller thing later, but let's focus on that spot right there real quick. You could see it. I mean, look at that. You could tell. And it was like the most obvious thing in the world to the palm of my hand. You could feel it very easily. And now that I lowered that, I got rid of that chamfer's edge a little bit. So I'm actually going to bring that back in. And that's better. Let's feel it. Oh yeah, way smoother. And it will get even more smoother once we hit it with the sandpaper. So let's go to town, knocking some of these edges down, and then we'll transition over to the sandpaper. One of the things that I like to do at this point is we have a pretty, it's supposed to be fairly flat on the front edge. It's not supposed to be dead flat, but I like taking out the ruler and just looking to see where we've got some dips. So right there, I don't know if you can see that, but I've got like a dip between this point and that point. And in order to get rid of that, I'm actually going to work this down a little and this down a little, and hopefully hit kind of right on that center spot, so that way that doesn't get taken away. Which this actually looks like a belly right here to me, like a really high spot. Yeah, look at that. Super high. So the problem is actually more so this section right here, which happened when we were using the bandsaw. So I'm going to knock that down and we're going to see how that feels. I might even mark that segment. So I'm going to just start from there to there and we'll work it down. Yeah. I'm going to check for anything more. This is a high spot right here. It needs to be a little bit more of a gully, but and then here's a high spot too. All of this will work with the sander as well. The sander does a nice job of joining the edges. So yeah, I actually don't want to get rid of that center line just yet. So we're going to deal with that a little bit later. Notice I still have my center line drawn onto this axe handle. And that actually, I use that a lot to like make sure I'm symmetrical as I'm running down with the Drawknife. So yeah, let's kind of just knock some of these edges down. Maybe we'll get into the knob a little tiny bit. See how far away we are? We actually can bring all of this down way closer to this finish point and figure out where that is on the other side and work this down as well. So let's start on this end. Knock some of these spots down. You can use a spoke shave for this. Hell, you can even use a plane for this actually, if you really like, because you can get some, like knocking the hard edges down is what I mean. But I just like using the Drawknife. It's a tool that once you are used to it, it is very effective. Just as effective as a spoke shave. The nice thing about spoke shaves is if you're starting out and you're not proficient with the Drawknife, it's fixed depth, so you won't wind up diving. With a Drawknife, you can dive into the wood, and that kind of like ruins what you're working on. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. Notice how little I'm doing. Okay, there's a grain change right there. Me pushing with my Drawknife is a great example of something you should not do. Cut myself many times doing that, so I would not actually suggest it. All right, let's see. That's that low spot, so I'm going to be careful right here because we're not really committed at that point. Pretty flat grained right here, and what I mean by that is you know, as you get low, and anything that's flat grained, as you get underneath it and then you pull back up, you're actually going against the grain when you pull back up. So you have to be careful when you're running into some pretty flat grain stuff. Now, flat grain is exactly what you want on an axe handle, but, because that means that there's no run out, but it's just something you need to be considerate of while you're working with wood. I apologize, I can already tell this video is going to be 80 years long, but I really wanted to make one video that is very concise and full of info. I am sure that I will make some shorter ones in the future. Low spot, right? Notice how I'm not touching the center. I'm using those rough edges, which I cut out on the bandsaw, as kind of like boundaries that I'm not willing to cross just yet. I will hit those boundaries with a sander, but right now with a draw knife, I'm actually using this center line as a reference. That if I go lower than that, then the width is not going to be the width that I intended it to be. The second you start getting out of these two axes, actually, let me take a moment just to explain that. That's why we cut them out correctly on the bandsaw. If you go beyond, if you cut beyond that limit, or beyond that limit, or beyond this one, or beyond this one, the center lines, then you're reducing the size of the shape of the handle that you intended when you cut it off on the bandsaw. And that, we did that very purposely. And this is the reason why. This is like a limit that you will not cross until you are close to kind of a finished product. And we are getting pretty close at this point. We can probably switch over to the sander at this point, and I'd feel okay about that. And then we'll come back to working on the shoulder and working on the knob. But that's just something I'd like to point out. So yeah, actually let's jump over to the sander and see how this looks. Okay, so here we are. I've sanded this down quite a bit, but I would like to point out a few things to you folks. Take a look and notice the spots where earlier we were calling low spots. You will actually see that they are still marked. I haven't hit them with the sander. I haven't hit this spot with the sander. I took this section down, I took this section down like we were talking about earlier, but I haven't hit that yet. Notice here, that's one of our low spots. I actually didn't touch this section right there. We got another low spot right here. It actually kind of goes all the way to this section. You can see I didn't touch that. And I got another low spot right here, and you can see I didn't touch that. And you can also kind of tell, maybe, I don't know how good the camera is showing it, but you can kind of tell it's still a little bit boxy. But this is a lot farther along than where we were just a minute ago. And I'm gonna call it for the night. I have a long ride home, so it's the end of my work week, and I got a long ride home, and so I'm just gonna call it at this point, and then we'll pick back up probably next week or the week after, and do more of the finish sanding. But this is another point where we might switch gears. We might stop focusing on the handle itself, and we might actually completely just start focusing on the knob. Because I like how everything's going, I can commit to doing the most difficult part of making an axe handle for me, which is actually making the knob. I'm very critical of the symmetry and all that kind of stuff, so it's quite the task. But so we'll probably start by doing that, and we'll see at that point. But things are looking great. I'll see you then.